Denis Diderot, a well-known thinker of the 18th century, once said, "The distance between the throne and the altar can never be too great." But how do we define this distance? Is it truly the separation between church and state, or is it the government putting restrictions on religion in public places? By going through the history of this now contradicting phrase, we will be able to understand what it really means and its effects on our school system and education in America. The term separation between church and state dates back to before the foundation of the United States of America, to a time known as the Enlightenment period. In the Enlightenment period was a movement of the early 18th century that was characterized by scientific, social, political, and religious analysis. During this time, there was a very influential English political philosopher by the name of John Locke, and he believed that government doesn't have the authority to influence what people believe or their morals because it wasn't something that people could give up or surrender to the government for them to regulate or control. This concept, also popular with other famous political thinkers at the time, was very influential and promoted the idea of separation of church and state. The founding fathers had this in mind as well, as they incorporated a lot of the philosophies of the famous political philosophers from the Enlightenment period into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Specifically in the First Amendment, we can see influence from these famous political philosophers for the 5 essential freedoms the founding fathers created. So the 5 essential freedoms would be the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of petition, the freedom of assembly, and last but certainly not least, the freedom of religion. The freedom of religion is twofold in that it has the first part is the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the state or government from establishing any official church or religion, and the second part, which is the Free Exercise Clause, which allows people to worship in whatever way they see fit. Although the actual words separation between church and state are never explicitly stated in the First Amendment, or the Constitution for that matter, it is clear that the government didn't want religion to be interfering with them, and people didn't want government to be interfering with their religion. The first appearance of the actual phrase separation between church and state is in Thomas Jefferson's letter in reply to the concerns of the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut. In his letter, he states, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, and he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only, and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislator would make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." Here Jefferson makes reference to the First Amendment's twofold freedom of religion, reinforcing the idea that the government is to have no decision in how the church is run, and the church has no decision in how the government's run. As it appears throughout history, the implied meaning of separation between church and state has been changed. Rather than trying to keep order in society, it's actually caused more tension between opposing viewpoints. Over the years, through many Supreme Court cases, the meaning has been skewed and has caused a problem within the public school system of the United States. The problem being that schools cannot effectively teach when everyone is too concerned about what they can and cannot do as to not offend people or do something illegal. Separation of church and state has become simply just prohibiting any religions related topics in any public place. So in school, no prayer in school. Instead, no prayer in school. It has to be a moment of silence, and even sometimes that gets rejected. No religious music. You can't say Christmas. It has to be Happy Holidays. No teaching of the creation story as a possibility of our existence. And instead of the creation story being a possibility, the creation story is known as a myth, and the Big Bang Theory and evolution are the only reason that we could possibly be here. I'm not saying that education has always been built around religion, because it hasn't. I'm just saying that the government and school systems haven't been so, there hasn't been so much discrimination towards religious peoples in the education system as there has been in the past century. People started taking advantage of their freedoms and started taking advantage of their freedoms that allowed them, that the government allowed them, and twisting the Constitution originally meant, changing separation of church and state into do not mention anything to do with God in any public place, especially school. A possible solution to this problem is to simply go back to the basics, go back to the way it was and what separation of church and state actually meant. Although it's very hard, it's very possible to have a Supreme Court ruling reversed and overturned. To overturn a Supreme Court case, there are two different options. Either 3/4 of the states have to agree to overturn the ruling, or the Supreme Court has to reverse a previous ruling if another case comes up with that questions the same ruling. They can make a different ruling at the end of the new case. It seems complicated and quite hard to accomplish, but it has been done before and it can be done again. If a lot of limitations on schools were to be lifted by overturning these unjust rulings, the problems associated with them would no longer be prominent in the education system, and teachers could finally teach effectively. In conclusion, we have gone over early uses of the term separation between church and state, its place in American history, and the problems that now arise, and also the possible solutions to fix these problems. As we ponder on what it really means, think about what Dennis Diderot said, and remember that the distance between the throne and the altar can never be too great.